All right, so hello everyone and welcome to Speed Reading for Entrepreneurs. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started here with our first set of slides. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Fellow entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, the reason why I wanted to do this was because I feel like how speed reading has helped me as an entrepreneur in launching Iris. Um, I don't think I would have been able to do it without having these skills. And actually, to give you a quick idea how I got involved running an organization that teaches speed reading classes across the U.S. and different parts of the world, and also online, I learned speed reading when I was in college. I learned it from a college professor that I had, and I started kind of showing some of my friends and classmates, some of the techniques that I had learned. Actually, it would just kind of come about when somebody might see me reading, and my friend would say, "Okay, are you skimming or are you actually understanding what you're reading here?" And I would say, "No, I understand it really well, and I learned these skills earlier, and they're really, really helpful. They're helping me get through college and balance." At that time, I had a full-time job. I was taking classes at night, so I was full-time school, full-time job, and it was really helping me out. And I would show my friends like little techniques and tips here and there. Um, but I felt like I had an edge over a lot of other students, and it was helping me get through college. And it wasn't easy, balancing a full-time job and full-time school, but it definitely would have been impossible had I not learned some speed reading techniques. So I want to go over those techniques today in light of the fact that the people that are in this webinar are watching. You're either an entrepreneur or you're an aspiring entrepreneur. And being an entrepreneur means that you have to get a lot of information and put it into action so you can run your business efficiently, so your business can make money. And to me, reading is a way of kind of generating ideas. Um, Probably, as far as like brainstorming, some people say they get their best ideas when they're in the bathroom, maybe taking a shower. For me, I feel like when I'm reading, that's when I'm getting my best ideas. So think about all those business books you've been wanting to read but haven't had time. And this is the thing I hear when I talk to entrepreneurs here. I'm based here in Chicago. When I talk to other entrepreneurs, they always tell me, I'd love to get more reading done, but I'm so busy with my business. So to me, if you're an entrepreneur, learning to speed read is a crucial skill. Just like if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be good at sales. You probably need to be good at, maybe you're good at management. Maybe you're good at marketing. Maybe you're good at, advertising. All of these things that you're good at. This needs to be one of the skills that you add to your toolbox. So what I want to do in this webinar is I want to cover as much as we can about speed reading. If you've come to one of our classes before, you already know some of the basics. We'll quickly review that, but I want to jam-pack as much information as we can in here as possible because I know you're all very busy people and we don't have time to kind of, add any fluff here. So let's get right into it. Here's what we're going to be covering today. How to quickly boost your reading speed. If you haven't taken one of our speed reading courses, we'll give you a quick step guide on how to start improving it today. How to selectively choose your reading. How to fly through books, magazines, news, blog posts, and other types of information. How to stay focused. This can be very hard if you're an entrepreneur, especially since if you're working for yourself, you don't have a set time that you have to get to work. You don't have set duties and tasks. You have to kind of set it on your own, and that's why it's very easy for a lot of entrepreneurs to lose focus. We're going to talk about how to stay focused and how that can help us out with reading. And the last thing I want to talk about is actionable reading, and this is a technique and a strategy that I've developed to help me get more done while I'm reading. Because who wants to just read and read and read and not get anything done? So I'll explain how it helps entrepreneurs get things done. So let's start with our first tip. To quickly boost your reading speed. If you haven't already been training yourself to speed read, the simplest thing you can do right now is start using your hand to guide your eyes. Now, I know this isn't practical if you read on the screen, because who wants to drag their hand across the screen? Or if you're reading on an iPad, you're going to move the screen around. You could use your hand on a Kindle if you've got one of those that doesn't have the touch screens. But if you've got a physical book or a magazine, using your hand is going to help you out tremendously. Why? Because your eyes are naturally attracted to motion, and when you're pointing to something, your eyes are going to focus a little better on it. So this is a principle that's taught in any kind of speed reading program. Use your hand, or you could use a pen to guide your eyes. That's going to help you out a lot. That's also going to help you focus better. And actually, usually the boost in speed happens because you're better focused when you're reading, when you're reading with your hand. Now, Another thing I want to talk about is if you do a lot of reading on the computer screen, you said, you can't really use your hand, or you don't want to because you don't want to mess up your screen. Well, you can use an application like Accelerator. Accelerator is an application that we developed here at IRIS, and it's a free speed reading tool that you can access through the website you see on your screen. I'm actually going to show you really quickly how it works so you can get a quick idea. You go to accelerator.com, so let me open up another browser window here. Here's what the app looks like. Very simple app. You simply cut and paste the material that you want to read into that application. Now let me show you exactly how it works. Let's take a sample article from America's finest news source, The Onion. And let's say we want to read this article right here. New study finds that 85% of Americans don't know all the dance moves to the national anthem. Okay, let's say we want to read this article. All we do is we simply highlight the material we want to read, and it will skip over the pictures, by the way, if you highlight any pictures. And then you copy that material, you go into the Accelerator, paste it in the box, click read, and now you set your reading speed. How fast do you want to go? Maybe you want to go 400 words a minute, or 300 words a minute, or 350. You pick whatever speed feels comfortable. Now the average reading speed is 200 words a minute. Let's go a little faster than that. So if you're reading at the average speed, I'd recommend, boosting the speed a little bit. Let's say 300. Now, chunk size, the second setting right here is how many words do you want to see at a time? Right now it's set to 3. We'll keep it at that. Window width, this is set to this. You could always expand that. That's how many, if you have a very short window width, the words are going to be dropping down to another line. So you could put this at like 900 so the words don't drop to a second line, change the font size and so on. Let me show you how this application works. I want you to look right in the middle of the screen and just absorb this information. It's going to be blinking the words at 300 words per minute. So let's read this article right here about this new study finding 85% of Americans don't know all the dance moves to the national anthem. All right, here we go. Okay, so you guys get the idea. Hope you're enjoying that article. Um, Pretty funny article. But the way that Accelerator works, and the reason why it can help you to read faster, it blinks the words at a set speed, and you could actually pace yourself and go a little faster. For example, if you're comfortable, if you haven't learned any kind of speed reading techniques and you're just an average reader, chances are you're reading around 200 words a minute, maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower. But if you want to easily boost your reading speed, this method of reading, it's known as Rapid Serial Visual Presentation. The acronym is RSVP. This is a RSVP reader. Now, if you buy any kind of like speed reading software program, this is essentially, for the most part, what they're giving you. Why buy the program when you could get this for free? And we are not planning to charge for this, so you can get it at accelerator.com. Check that out when you get a chance. But here's what I don't recommend you do. You should not do one word at a time. So let's say we wanted to bump up our speed to 400 words a minute. And you see how I had it set on 3 words? What if you had it on 1 word? Now, I don't recommend this because you're capable of reading more than 1 word at a time. And that's actually part of the reason, one of the things that you want to do when you're speed reading is to grab groups of words. And you're perfectly capable of doing this, but when you're doing 1 word at a time, you're really limiting yourself. Actually, watch how, this might be a little hard for you to read. It's at 400 words a minute, 1 word at a time. Now, you might be able to get it, but it's going to be a little harder. Okay, you can see the words blinking very fast there. Watch what happens when we change it to 3 words at a time. It's a big difference. It's actually going to feel like it's going slower. Even though it's going at the same speed, they're just blinking more words at a time. Here we go. Okay, and you can see that's going slower. It's a little easier to comprehend. And if you started with this webinar reading at the average speed of 200 words a minute, and you were able to comprehend that pretty well, that's already 400 words a minute. It's a very quick way to double your reading speed if you have no previous the speed reading training. Now, you can use this tool to get some reading done. What I'd recommend if you're doing a lot of reading on the computer screen is you use the bookmarklet right over here. Click on that. What you simply do is you grab this and you drag it. You click on it and drag it up to your bookmarks bar. So let's say we put it right over there. And then what we can do, the next time we have an article, remember how we had to highlight and then copy and paste? Instead of doing all those steps, what you can do is you can simply highlight the material, and then you just click on the bookmarklet, and it does the copy paste for you, and it'll remember your settings from last time. So it's just a faster way to get to this screen. So I'd highly recommend checking out Accelerator, get that bookmarklet, and we're going to be making upgrades to this application as well. And if you have any kind of if you have any suggestions, by all means, send me an email. I'll have my contact information on the screen at the end of this webinar. So let's move on to our next slide. So this is one easy way to boost your reading speed pretty quickly using an application like Accelerator. Now, another way to improve your reading speed, and this actually takes some practice. We all know that reading is a skill, and like any kind of skill, if you're trying to get better at it, you got to practice. And what you can do with speed reading, there are these things called speed drills, and you can practice these speed drills to read faster. Now, what exactly is a speed drill? Right over here, whoops, right over here is my explanation of what a speed drill is. You are simply reading faster. You're not exactly reading, you're kind of glancing at words very quickly, but you're purposely going at a much faster rate than you would normally read, maybe 3 to 4 times faster. Now, why would you go through material 3 to 4 times faster than you can actually comprehend it? The reason is simply this. You want to compare this to the, I like to give an analogy of driving. When you're driving on a highway, you might be going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour for an extended period of time. And I want you to think about, how does it feel when you get off the highway and you got to slow down because you're no longer on the highway. When you get off the highway, doesn't it feel kind of slow? It feels almost sometimes extremely slow, even though sometimes you've only dropped it to maybe 40 or 50 miles an hour, and maybe you're going through a 20-mile-an-hour school zone, and you don't feel like you're going 40 or 50 because you got used to going 80. And I want you to think about how your reading is very similar. If you get used to seeing words at 700, 800, 900, or 1,000 or more words per minute, what will happen is as you start getting used to seeing words that fast, when you drop it down to maybe 400 words a minute, it's not going to feel as fast. So let's say your regular reading speed is 200 words a minute. Actually, I'll show you an example of how you might use this drill, how you can do this drill using the Accelerator application. Now, by the way, a lot of people will ask me, so how long do I have to be doing these drills? Do I have to do them for the rest of my life? No, not really. What you can do, if you're really trying to train yourself to speed read, what I'd recommend is try doing maybe 15 minutes a day for 2 weeks of speed drills. Let me show you one example of how you can train yourself with speed drills using the Accelerator application. So let me go back to that article that we had, and I'll go back to Accelerator. And what you would do, you take some text that you want to read. Well, not exactly read, because we're going to be going much faster than we normally read. We click on the Accelerator app, it pastes it for us, we click read, and what we would do, let's say you're an average reader, and you read at 200 words per minute. And by the way, you would want to find out approximately how fast do I read comfortably to begin with. What you could do, if you're at 200, what I would recommend is when you do a speed drill, you put this at 600. And you say, okay, let me practice seeing the words at 600 words a minute. Now, I'm going to try to get you might try to get as much comprehension as possible, but you know that you're going much faster and it's going to be a challenge. We're at 600 words a minute. We try it out. Now, you might do this for maybe 10, 15. What I'm recommending for anybody in this webinar, if you really want to train yourself and optimize your reading speed, it's going to take a couple weeks, 15 minutes a day, to really get into that range of maybe 600 plus words per minute. So you train yourself going at 600 words a minute. And then remember how we said, let's say your reading speed was 200. After training yourself for like 15 minutes, after you're done with that speed drill, that set of speed drills, what you do then is just say, all right, let me try, what happens if I go 400 words a minute, which was double my average reading speed. Let me try that out. And when you got used, if you got used to seeing it at 600, now 400 is going to feel kind of slow. And actually, some of you in here are getting that pretty easily. So let's say 400 words a minute. Let's say you're very comfortable at 400 words a minute. Then you might try to go in here and jack this up to 1,200 words a minute to practice at that speed. So again, you're practicing at a very high level, and then when you're going back to reading, you're dropping it down to something that's, a bit of a challenge, but it's still with comprehension. So keep in mind when you're doing speed drills, you are not trying to get perfect comprehension. It's almost like skimming. You're looking at words at an extremely fast pace because you want to get used to seeing the words at a very fast pace. That's how you can start training yourself to be an experienced speed reader. Let's go back to the slides real quick and move on. We've got a lot to cover today. Let's now talk about our next thing. How do we do a speed drill in a book? Because we just talked about here's how we can train ourselves using Accelerator. How do we train ourselves if we've got lots of, let's say, business books to read, and they're not on the computer screen or a Kindle, they're actually physical books? One of the things I'd recommend you do is you do something very similar. You go through, you start at a chapter, and you're not trying to read per se. You're doing a speed drill through the chapter. And you're going to be going at a speed that's much, much faster than you would normally read. So maybe 3 or 4 times faster. Now, while you're doing that, I would stop to make sure I'm looking at my headings and subheadings. Not exactly stop, but I'd be glancing at them as I go along. And while you're doing that, you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. By that, I mean while you're doing a speed drill in a chapter, you're going at a pace that's 3 or 4 times faster than you can comfortably read. But while you're doing that, you're checking out the headings, the subheadings, the structure of the chapter. And later, when you actually have to read that chapter, it's actually going to be a little easier. That's what's known as previewing a chapter. We'll talk about that more a little later. Now, here's another way to boost your reading speed. You want to use the deadline technique. The deadline technique is something, we all know that deadlines can make us more productive, okay? It helps your productivity and your focus. We'll talk about that more later. But here's a simple way to use the deadline technique to get almost an immediate boost in your reading speed. First of all, take a book you're currently reading and see how long it takes you to read 1 page. I'm on this bullet right here. See how long it takes you to read 1 page. So you time yourself. Let's say it took you 1 minute and 20 seconds to read that 1 page. And all the pages in most books have about the same amount of words per page. And actually, let's say you were reading at 300 words a minute. And how would you find that out? Let's say, I don't know, you calculated it out and you found that your pages have a little less than 300 words a minute. Well, if it took you 1 minute and 20 seconds to read that 1 page, what I would recommend you try doing is you try to beat your time. Now, what do I mean by that? The next page that you read, you set your timer. You set it at 1 minute and you say, I'm going to try to get through this page in 1 minute and see if you can do it. Now, you continue doing this as you're reading through the book. Now, you don't have to necessarily do 1 minute per page and check that often. What you might do is say, all right, I'm going to try to get through 2 pages in 2 minutes. Now, one of the things that you can try to aim for, let's say you currently read at 300 words a minute, and your book has about 400 words per page. Why not try to challenge yourself and say, let me get through 1 page in 1 minute. That would be 400 words a minute. It's a little faster than I'm used to, but I'm going to try to do this. And what's going to happen, this is what you're going to notice, is that when you're setting deadlines, you start improving your ability to focus, and your productivity goes up. How do we know this? Well, we've all had situations in the past where we've had to write maybe papers for school, and maybe that paper was due 3 weeks from now. And when did you get it started? You got it started the night before. And have you ever been against a deadline where you absolutely had to get this stuff done? And all of a sudden, when you're up against a deadline, your productivity goes through the roof. I'll give you an example. I was extremely busy yesterday, and I got up today, and I had a lot to do this morning, and I also had to put together all these slides. And I actually got these slides done. This is somewhat, I guess, procrastination, but an hour before the webinar started, I started putting together these slides. I knew what I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to make sure I got some visuals so I can guide myself through and guide you guys through. I got these slides done maybe 10 minutes before we started the webinar today. Now, I know that sounds like I'm a horrible procrastinator, but I have a reason. I think I have a pretty good excuse for why I got these slides done late. I actually feel like I got through these slides. I got everything that I want to make sure I got done. But what happened in this last hour, what I want you to think about is this. In this last hour that I had to get these slides done, I turned off my phone. I made sure no one's going to interrupt me. I even, believe it or not, I even turned off my internet. for a moment because I wanted to make sure that I don't get interrupted by email and things like that. So another way to quickly boost your reading speed is to improve your focus. How can we improve our focus? Well, you can set deadlines. You can use your hand. We've already talked about some of these things, and we will talk about more a little later. Now, let's also talk about how to selectively choose what we're reading, because the fact of the matter is you cannot read it all, okay? You can't read it all. There's just too much out there. And also another reason is not everything is worth your time. So you really do need to be picky about what you read. Why do you need to be picky? Because your time, the common phrase is time is money, right? Well, if you don't believe time is money, think about all the money that advertisers are spending to divert your attention and get a little bit of your time. When you're watching TV, that 30-second commercial, how much do you think that advertiser paid? And they're paying for your time. So it's funny because some people do not value their time. Sometimes advertisers value your time more than you might value your time. So it's important to know, all right, I've got this reading done. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm running a business. Now, I can't be reading for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, and you don't have to. So we got to be picky and choosy and selective about what we read. Let's talk about how we can, some ways that we can, I want to give you a process and a framework, and actually some ideas that you can use. And I hope some of these ideas really resonate with you and that you start using them because they will help you absorb more information. We kind of want to put our ability to intake information on steroids. I know steroids are bad, but, well, I mean, it depends if there's a medical purpose for it, yes. But what I mean by putting your information intake on steroids is we want to get the edge over other people. If you're an entrepreneur and you're very competitive, you want to make sure that you're acting on maybe the latest some marketing research that explains how people buy. Maybe you want to take advantage of that information. You need to read through that and then you need to apply. And not everything is going to be worth your time. Let's talk about some ways that we can be selective. And by the way, being selective is, in my opinion, what it's part of to be a speed reader, a trained speed reader. Because it's not just about going through material fast. If you're going through material fast and you're reading something that's not worth your time, I wouldn't say you're not very efficient, or actually not very effective. Efficient, you might be going through the material efficient, but you're not being effective if you're reading something that's not worth your time. So keep in mind there's that distinction between efficient and effective. Let's talk about one of these things here. Here's what I recommend you do. You utilize the 80-20 principle when reading. Now, for those of, I'm sure some of you in here are familiar with the 80-20 principle. For those of you that aren't, let me explain it really quick. I'll give you the general definition, and then we'll talk about how it's applicable in various parts of life. This is also known as Pareto's Law. It's named after this Italian mathematician who first kind of wrote about this. And there's actually a really good book on the 80-20 principle that you can probably find on Amazon. And this book talks about the various ways you can apply it with productivity and things like that. I want to talk about how we apply it to reading, give you some ideas on that. But the 80-20 generally states that 20% of the inputs give you 80% of the outputs. Now, it's generally speaking. It's not always exactly 20-80, but let me give you one example. Think about companies and the revenue that they make. Think of companies like Apple. Sometimes they find that 20% of the company's products are giving them 80% of the revenue. Now, it's not always exactly 20% giving 80%. Sometimes it's 15% giving 70%. It doesn't always add up to 100%. I want you to know that. But if you do think about companies like Apple, how many products does Apple sell? I mean, they sell thousands of products. You would have to obviously count, the iPads, the iPhones, all of these things, but the laptops and computers. But then you would also have to count all the apps that they sell, because they get a cut of that. All the songs that they sell. And I think Apple, Apple sells thousands of things. Well, I think all of us would agree that a small percentage of what Apple makes, maybe 20%, 20% of the products, maybe less than 20% of the products, are giving them 80% of the revenue. Now, I haven't looked at Apple's financial statements, but I'm sure if someone did a financial analysis, they would find this unbalanced relationship where it's very lopsided. A small amount of the products giving most of the revenue. And that's one example of the 80-20 principle. Now, another example, in some developing countries, you have wealth distribution where 10% of the population has 90% of the wealth. Or here's another example that applies to, I think, most people. It definitely applies to me. I would argue that 20% of the clothes that you own are worn 80% of the time by you. And I think that applies to a lot of people. We all have that favorite pair of jeans, a few t-shirts that we like, or regular shirts that we like, you know, and then you've got your formal wear that you maybe wear a few times a year at special occasions, right? So keep in mind this 80-20 principle applies to a lot of things. I want to talk about how it applies to reading and how it can help us to selectively choose our reading. And ultimately, this is going to help us be more productive with our reading. So by productive, I mean going faster, getting more comprehension, getting better retention. Let's talk about some ways we can use this. So think about this. Does 20% of your chapter have 80% of the information? In a lot of cases, that's true. Now, when I say in a lot of cases, again, I'm not saying it's exactly 20% of your chapter having exactly 80% of the information. I'm just saying that there are parts of your chapter that are more important than others. And I don't think anybody in here would argue that every single paragraph is equally important, or every single sentence is equally important, or every single word is equally important. Some information is more important, and how do we find that information? We're going to talk about a process for doing this in a moment. And how can you spend 20% of your time to get 80% of the information? How can we do that? Well, let's talk about one way we can do that. First of all, focusing on first sentences. The first sentences tend to be main ideas. They tend to be the topic sentence. The first sentence tells you, hey, here's what I'm going to tell you about in this long paragraph. Now, we know it's not always the case, but hey, 80% of the time it is, or more than 80% of the time. So if we can focus on those first sentences, that's going to help us to be selective. Now, I'll give you a really good example. When you're reading through, let's say, a business book, you know that not everything in that business book is going to be equally important to you. Some things are going to be more important to other kind of entrepreneurs. And let's say your main focus is trying to improve your marketing. Well, what if you're on a chapter that's talking about management and managing, 50 employees? Obviously, if you're a startup and it's just you, or it's just you and a handful of other people, that is not very applicable to you. So, skipping that chapter might be a good idea. It wouldn't be worth your time, or kind of flying through it a little faster. Now, let's say you don't have a structured chapter and you don't really know what's going to be important, what's not going to be important, because maybe there's no headings or subheadings. Maybe you're reading an article. You can still focus on these first sentences, because a lot of writers will tell you in that first sentence, here's what I'm going to tell you about in this paragraph. Now, what I do, here's how I utilize this. I will be reading a paragraph, and I'll go a little more slowly on that first sentence. And after that first sentence, I speed up. So it's like you're taking the main idea and trying to run with it. Now, here's an alternative way that I apply this focus on the first sentences. Sometimes when I know that the entire book is not going to be geared towards me in every way, what I'll try to do to be very selective while I'm reading is I'll read the first sentence of the paragraph, and then I'll make a decision immediately. Do I want to read the whole paragraph? A lot of times I'm saying no, and then I just skip the paragraph and I read the next paragraph, first sentence of the paragraph, and then I decide yes or no. Sometimes it's like, hey, this sounds like it's interesting, and I'll read through it. And I'll still, when I speed up, I'll speed up not to the point where I can't understand anything, but I'm basically shifting my speed. Just like when you drive, you don't always go at the same speed when you drive. Sometimes you slow down, sometimes you speed up. So we need to manage our reading speed in a similar kind of way. Now, again, I'm going through paragraphs and I'm reading the first sentence. Should I read this paragraph? Read the next paragraph, first sentence. Okay, should I read this paragraph? And sometimes I'm skipping paragraphs because I read the first sentence and I know that that paragraph is not that important. We all know that writers, or if you don't know, you need to know that some writers will add fluff to their books, because what major publisher is going to publish a 60-page book on a certain topic? Now, some topics really only require 60 pages, but unfortunately, major publishers know that the consumer is not going to pay $15.99 or $20 for a hardcover that is only 60 pages. So writers will try to aim for maybe 150 pages a minimum. 200 pages is kind of the standard. We've all seen books that are 300 or more pages. And if you're a writer, they're going to be adding like little stories here and there. So we need to filter through the fluff. And this is how we can do it, by focusing on those first sentences. Let's talk about another way to be selective while we're reading. And actually, you can use this in combination with focusing on first sentences. Using the multiple reading process. If you've been to one of our speed reading courses, you know about this already. This is a 3-step process at a minimum: a preview, an overview, a read. And the preview is basically where you get your intro and summary. The overview is where you get your main points, and the reading part is where you get your detail. And before you even get to step number 3, if you did a preview and overview, let's say you were reading a chapter in a business book, you would start by doing a preview, and you would read your introduction and your conclusion to that chapter. Now, sometimes those intros and conclusions are clearly specified, and it's a few paragraphs at the beginning, a few at the end. If you don't have a clearly specified intro and conclusion, I would just read the first and last paragraph of that chapter, and that's it. Now, I go to my overview. The second step is to get the main points. If you've got headings and subheadings and boldface words, this is what you're looking at this point. It's just a matter of flipping through the chapter, getting an idea of the structure, looking at every heading, subheading, finding out what's going to be important in this chapter. Now, if you don't have headings and subheadings, let's say you're reading an article, or the book doesn't have headings and subheadings, you would read the first sentence of every paragraph, like we said earlier. Focus on the first sentences. But in the overview step, this is where you would actually be reading all the first sentences in that chapter. Now, if you had headings and subheadings, there's no need to read the first sentence of every single paragraph because you have all the main points structured and spelled out for you and easy to find. So after you've gotten all the main points, before you go to step number 3, which is read, what you would do is after step number 2, you have to make a decision. As an entrepreneur, someone that has decision-making authority over your time, you need to figure out, is this worth my time? Before you get to step number 3, that's an extremely important thing to remember. Now, when we teach this class to like college students or high school students, we're not really telling them this kind of advice. Decide whether or not you should read it. Because for the most part in college and in high school, you're assigned reading and you're expected to read it beginning to end for detail. But as an entrepreneur, not everything is worth your time. You know this. And if you try to read everything beginning to end, then you're going to be wasting a lot of time and you're not going to be getting things done. So make that decision. Now, if it is worth your time, then obviously now you're reading for detail. But here's the speed reading element of it. If you've done these first 2 steps, isn't that going to enable you to go faster on step 3? Aren't you going to go a lot faster because you know what to expect? And when you know what to expect, it's easier to read something. And not only are you going to read it faster, because you know what to expect, you're going to have better comprehension. Now, what about retention? And this whole week we've been doing webinars on memory skills. And one of the biggest principles behind remembering anything is repetition. Repetition helps you remember things. I'll repeat that. Repetition helps you remember things. And look at all the repetition going on over here. 1, 2, 3 repetitions. Now, most people, how do they read? I'll explain to you. Most people just start the chapter and slowly make their way all the way to the end. That's to me, that's a pretty boring way to read a chapter. And if you're like me and you have a pretty short attention span, this preview and overview and this whole multiple reading process is perfect for people with short attention spans. And here's why. You're never spending too much time on one step. First, you're previewing, then you're overviewing, then you're reading. Now, I also like to take notes sometimes when I'm reading something really, really important. So I take notes after each one of these steps. So I'll preview, then I'm taking some notes, then I'm overviewing, then I'm taking some notes. And then while I'm reading, I'm taking notes maybe at the end of every section if I get to that 3rd step. But most people don't do this. Most people will just start at the beginning of a chapter, whether they're a college student, an entrepreneur, or anyone else, they're reading beginning to end, an article. And this is probably, I mean, I hate to say it, this is probably the worst way to read anything. Now, I understand if you're reading mystery novels and you don't want to know the ending, then okay, you read it beginning to end. But if you're an entrepreneur, you're probably not reading mystery novels every single day to improve your business. If you like reading mystery novels, that's a whole other thing for interest. But to preview and overview something, never read anything beginning to end. You want to jump around. Think of this preview and overview like what do you do before you exercise or play a sport? You basically will warm up and stretch. Think of this like warming up and stretching. And what I like to think of this in terms of the 80-20 principle, these first 2 steps are where you're trying to spend 20% of your time and maybe read 20% of the chapter in order to get 80% of the information. Now, if 80% is good enough for you, you decide that I don't even want to read this beginning to end. I've got enough information, it's time for me to move on, or it's time for me to take action on these ideas I just read. Or you might decide that, you know what, this is fascinating material. I really need to know this well inside out. It's extremely important to my business to get all the detail. Well, then we go to step number 3 and we start reading for detail. And that's how we get from 80% to 100%. Okay, so keep this multiple reading process in mind. It's extremely important. And actually, remember I showed you that Accelerator application? Before you do any kind of reading with the Accelerator application, you should still preview and overview that article that you're about to read. You read maybe the intro and the conclusion, and then you read the first sentences. Or maybe you look at the headings and subheadings. Let's say it's a very well-structured blog post. You could read the intro, the summary, all those headings, subheadings, any bulleted points, ordered lists, and then you decide whether or not you want to read it. That's a very efficient way to get through something. Well, let's step out. Let's go on to our next thing here. How do we preview an entire book? Because we just talked about this three-step process. And here's what I recommend you do. Look at all those books you got on your bookshelf. Maybe you're in your room right now, or you're at your office, and you're looking at, okay, I've got all this reading that I've been wanting to get done, and I haven't gotten it done. Or maybe I've only read a couple of chapters from these books. Here's a great way to utilize the 80-20 principle and what we call previewing a book. So what you would do is you would preview the book by simply reading the intro and the summary in every chapter. And what I recommend you do as an entrepreneur, before you read anything, beginning to end, you need to start off by reading the intro and summary of every chapter. Now that might just simply mean reading the first and last paragraph of a chapter, or if the chapters are very well structured and they have like something that says, introduction or objectives at the beginning, you read that, and then you read your summary. Now I know not all books are written this way, but I'm trying to get an idea, what is each chapter going to be about? And this is a great way to get an idea what the book is going to be about very, very quickly. For most books, this is going to take you maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes if it's got a ton of chapters. But reading the first and last paragraph of every chapter, or the intro and summary, is going to boil it down and kind of filter out the ideas and tell you, here's the most important stuff. So here's my personal challenge to you as an entrepreneur. For the next week, look at that stack of books that you have. Maybe you've got 5 books or 7 books, or maybe 10 or 20 books that you haven't gotten to. Or maybe you've got a reading list of books that you want to get to. What I recommend you do, starting tonight, try to read the first and last paragraph of every chapter. Try to do a book a day. And if you try this experience for 1 week, you'll find this to be extremely powerful. You might even want to try doing it for more than 1 week. Now, I saw some very disappointing data out there that said the average American reads 1 book a year. Now, if you're college educated, that number is a little higher, If you're college educated in the US, the average person reads 1.5 books a year. Think about the edge that you're getting in your career or as an entrepreneur. If you're reading just 4 books a year, you're reading a lot more than the average person. You're probably reading a lot more than the average entrepreneur. And if you can get through, actually, maybe keep in mind, not all books are worth your time. What if you were able to get through a book a day, reading the intro and summary of every chapter? It doesn't take a lot of time. You might do this first thing in the morning or before you go to bed, or every time you go to a bookstore. Go to the cafe, read the first and last paragraph of every chapter. After that, pull out your laptop, get some things done. This is a great way to start generating tons and tons of business ideas. And also deciding which books out there, because you know what? Business books are a dime a dozen. Every single day, another business book is being published. And some of these books become bestsellers, like the ones you see on your screen. Some of these books, and we know even just because they're a bestseller doesn't mean they're worth our time. So this is a great way to decide what books are worth my time. Maybe you've been hearing about Tipping Point for the longest and you've been just wanting to read it because you're wondering, why is everybody talking about this? Maybe this applies. Maybe there's that one idea that's going to turn around your business by reading that book. Reading the intro and summary is one good way to decide, is this book going to be worth my time? So it's something that I'm challenging all of you as entrepreneurs, for the next week. Try to do a book a day, first and last paragraph of every chapter, or the intro and summary. It's not going to take you more than 15 minutes a day. Now, let's talk about how do we go about previewing if you've got a Kindle. Now, I've got a Kindle. I love my Kindle because I can store a bunch of books on there. And I used to carry a lot of books with me, to and from work, and now I can store them on a Kindle. Now, not all my books are on a Kindle, and I still have some nostalgia for having a physical book. I've still got plenty of physical books, but if you've got a Kindle, there's a very simple way. View popular highlights. You see this tip that I've got on the screen. A lot of Kindle owners don't even know about this. And actually, you don't even have to have a Kindle to do this because the Kindle, let me show you real quickly, you can still buy Kindle books. Let's say you've got a PC. You could type Kindle for PC in a Google search, and there's basically a desktop application for a PC that you can download, and you can still buy the books and just read them on your screen. Or if you've got a Mac, you can go Kindle for Mac, and you do the same exact thing. I know a lot of you that are in here probably already know about this. You download this, and even without having a Kindle, you can get it. I think the Kindle now is like 79 bucks for the entry-level model. And actually, that's the one I have. I just keep the basic one, and you can still do this tip that I was talking about, where you're viewing the popular highlights. Let me explain to you what exactly this is. Remember how we just said, let's read the first and last paragraph of every chapter before we start reading the book. If you have a Kindle, you know that kind of clicking around and getting to the end of the chapter is a little harder than if you had a physical book. If you had a physical book, you could take a chunk of 40 pages and just flip them and get towards the end, right? But with a Kindle, you got to do a little bit of clicking, or you got to go back to the table of contents, go to another chapter, and so on. That's kind of tedious. But here's how I recommend you preview a book on a Kindle. Instead of doing this, what I just recommended to you, reading the intro and summary of every chapter, I recommend you do this. View the popular highlights. Here's what that means. Amazon, when you highlight anything in a Kindle, Amazon knows about it. Now, I know that raises all sorts of privacy issues, but here's how Amazon makes use of it, and here's how you can make use of it. If you click on View Popular Highlights in the menu when you're inside of any Kindle book, and again, you don't have to have a Kindle to do this. You can do this in the desktop application for PC or Mac as well. When you view the popular highlights, Amazon will show you the most popularly highlighted parts of the book. So in other words, Amazon takes all that data, all the people that have highlighted something, and they aggregate it. They kind of crowdsource that data, and they put it into, and they say, okay, here's a one sentence or a paragraph, and 1,872 people highlighted it. That probably means it's important, right? So Amazon will show you like the top 10 or top 20 popular highlights in a Kindle book. And this is actually a great way to preview a book on a Kindle. So before I read any of the books that I buy on a Kindle, I always do this. I will simply read all of the popular highlights, and then I'll know what the book is going to be about. And then I can also decide whether or not I want to read the book entirely, or maybe just a couple of the chapters. This is a good way to get an idea and preview that book. Now, what about reading magazines? Let me talk about how you can preview a magazine. Let's say we've got you can see there it says first and last paragraphs of articles. What you can simply do is read the first and last paragraph of an article. That's going to be your intro and summary. And it'll give you an idea of what it's going to be about, and you can decide whether or not you want to read this. In a little bit, I'm going to tell you how I do a preview to get through the one of the few magazines, actually the only two magazines I subscribe to, physical magazines, are The Economist and this paper called Crane's Chicago Business. It's like a Wall Street Journal for Chicago-related business. And the rest of my news I pretty much get online through my RSS Reader or whatever. Well, when I'm reading through The Economist, I'm going to talk to you about how I get through it in 15 minutes in just a moment. But you can preview a magazine article by doing the same thing, reading the first and last paragraph of the article. And then you can decide, is this article worth my time? Now, if it is, at that point you think worth your time, you would then go into step number 2, which we remember was our overview. And at this point in the article, you would be reading the first sentence of every single paragraph, right? And then you would decide whether or not you want to get through it and read it. And if you do, you would just read it right then. Well, let's move on and talk about how to preview a news article. We've still got a lot of information that I want to cover, and we've got about 15 minutes left to go. And by the way, if there's anything you want to get in touch with me about, I will have my contact information at the end of this webinar. Let's talk about how to preview a news article. For those of you that read a lot of news, let's say you're reading it on the internet or in a physical newspaper, news articles, it's important that you know they're structured in what's known as an upside-down triangle, okay, or an upside-down pyramid. Here's what that means. At the beginning of the article, you have the most important points, the general points, and the most important stuff is at the top. And as you go down, it gets more specific and more detailed. And in news articles, the information actually gets less important as you go to the bottom. So most news articles do not have like an elaborate, well-written conclusion. Most news articles just end. And here's what happens at the beginning of a news article. They tell you the who, the what, the where, the when, the how. So what I recommend if you're going to preview a news article, by previewing we mean instead of reading it just beginning to end, reading just a little bit of it to figure out, is this worth my time? I would recommend you read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. By the second paragraph or the third paragraph at the latest, you already know maybe 80% of the information. You can think of this as like the 80-20 principle here. At the top of the upside down triangle, you're getting 80% of your information. As you go down, it's, you're just going for the scraps. So you got to decide whether or not you want to know all of the information. So most of the time when I'm reading news, I'm just reading the first couple paragraphs and then I'm moving on. Because you know what? I'm not a reporter. I don't work for any of the news agencies. It's not my job to read the news all day. If you want to read news all day, there's 24-hour cable news networks that will feed you information all day. As an entrepreneur, this is not worth your time. I highly doubt that it is. Now, another thing, how to absorb tons of information quickly. This is what I mean by kind of putting your ability to intake information on steroids. I'd recommend using an RSS reader like Google Reader. Now, the reason there's a bunch of RSS readers out there. The reason why I mention Google Reader is because a lot of people have Gmail accounts or maybe use Google Apps. And if you have a Gmail account already, Google Reader just allows you to sign in with that. Now, this is just a screenshot of like an example of what Google Reader might look like. I want to show you my Google Reader and a quick idea how you do this for those of you that are not familiar. And again, I do realize a number of you entrepreneurs that are watching probably are familiar with RSS Reader, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We've all seen this icon. Let's say you let's say you're on the Wall Street Journal's website, and you want to subscribe to their. Well, that's annoying. Okay, hate pop-up ads. All right, you want to subscribe to their RSS feeds. Whenever you see this orange icon on a website that you visit regularly, next time click on it. Most people don't. And then subscribe to one of these feeds. Here's how it works. When you subscribe to a feed, let's say you want to keep track of, I don't know, technology news. What's new in technology? Okay, I want to click on that. You see this XML file? What you can do is you can copy that, and then you copy that link at the top, and you can go into your Google Reader, which is at google.com/reader, or if you're in your Gmail, you can simply go to the top right there where it says more, and then you can click on Reader. Well, after you get into your Google Reader, you click subscribe and you enter that URL in there. Because I know this looks intimidating to a lot of people, all this code, but you just need to take this right here and feed Google Reader this feed. There you go. Now here's what's happening. Now you are basically shown the most recent articles at the top, less recent at the bottom. And this is keeping track of technology news in the Wall Street Journal. Now, you can subscribe to all your favorite blogs, your news sites, and keep track of all your information in Google Reader. This Google Reader account is actually just an example account. Let me show you my actual Google Reader account so you get an idea of how you can organize this. Now, this is my actual Google Reader account, and it keeps track of tons and tons of information. And this is all information that I care about that I'm somewhat interested in. You can see right here that all items, there's 113 new articles for me. Well, obviously, even though I'm a speed reader, I'm not going to be reading every single one of these articles. They're simply not worth my time. For the most part, I'm just kind of glancing through headlines and things like that. But you can see I have them organized in a way where I have a folder called Google, a folder called Chicago, a folder called Education, a folder called Technology. These folders are keeping track of various websites. You can see right here. So the Technology folder is keeping track of maybe 10 different websites like TechCrunch, Mashable, eWeek, and so on. These are different websites I want to keep track of. If I want to read my tech news, I simply click on Technology, and it'll show me all right here. If I want to read it, I can click on that. You'll see videos can show up right in here. You can play them in the Google Reader. And for the most part, like I said, you're just pretty much going through and you're reading headlines and things like that. But what I recommend you do is you take the various interests that you have and you start mapping them out and putting them here. You can see I have a marketing folder because as an entrepreneur, marketing is very important. So I've got some marketing blogs in there. I've got a productivity folder, very interested in productivity. I've got all of these different areas because I'm trying to keep track of these different sites, and I put them organize them into folders. I last checked, I probably have, I'm sure, over 100 sites in my Google Reader account. What I do with this is I will put all this information in here, and then I'll just go to all items, and I'll scan the headlines, go through, and if there's anything interesting that pops out, I'll click on it, and maybe I'll read that. Now, what you can do with this, after you're done looking at your headlines, you simply click up here, mark all as read, and I click that, and you can see that went down to 0. There's no more new items. But since the morning, I checked this early in the morning, and since the morning there were like 100 new articles. But again, I'm not reading all of these. I'm just checking them out. So this is how you can use a Google Reader to really, really kind of help you keep track of a lot of information all in one place. I think of my Google Reader as like a funnel. I have an education folder with a bunch of different blogs and websites that deal with education because I want to know what's going on in the world of education. That's the business that I'm in. Okay, so that's how you use Google Reader. Now, all of you have probably also had the situation where you're going through something like your Google Reader and you start realizing, man, I'm interested in reading this, and I also want, where's my technology area? I'm keeping track of technology, and all of a sudden you start adding all these things. You're opening them in tabs maybe. Oh, Netflix streaming tops 1 billion, let me read about that. And sometimes you're clicking on too many things, you get a little click happy, and now you've got like 20 tabs open or more. And you realize, you know what, I should be working right now, not really reading all this stuff. So I want to introduce to you another reading-related app that I use. It used to be known as Read It Later. It's now called Pocket. It's at getpocket.com. This is free to use. Highly recommend it. You can see formerly Read It Later. This allows you to obviously read things later. Now when you sign up for this account, this works in any browser. It works with Internet Explorer, Firefox, Google Chrome, which I'm using right now, Safari. Let me show you exactly how this works. Remember all those articles I opened in tabs? I have the Google Chrome extension, and I click on this if I want to read this later. And I say, all right, save that to my Pocket account, page saved. Nice. Next one. Same thing. Page saved. Nice. Next one. And I'm just saving all these things. And later, when I want to access my reading list, I could just go to getpocket.com, and I could find all of my stuff simply in one place. So I click on my list, I'll log in, and there's all the articles. That one about the Hitmonk, right? Hitmonk sues patent troll after being asked to pay licensing fees. Let me read this. When you're done reading it, you would click the check mark. That means archive this article. Or if you wanted to delete it forever, you could click delete. Or maybe you want to favorite it. Let's say I archive this. It'll take you back to your list. And this is a great way to kind of save things for later, because let's say you're trying to get some stuff done, but you get these articles that you want to read later. This is a good way to say, hey, I don't have time for this right now. Let me set this aside. It's a good way to prioritize your reading and what you have to do. Now, if you're doing a lot of reading and you've got an iPad, one of my favorite apps, because there's a lot of apps for reading on the iPad. My favorite one right now is Zeit. Now, I know there's apps like Flipboard. There's other apps like Pulse, and there's a lot of really great reading apps. After looking at all of these apps, my favorite so far is Zeit, and I highly recommend it. Basically, it creates a personalized magazine for you, and I think anyone with an iPad should definitely keep track of this. And actually, here's what it'll do. If you have a Google Reader account, like I was just talking about, when you open up your Zeit app, it'll ask you, okay, do you want to connect this to Google Reader? And then it will extract all of the information from your Google Reader, and it will put it into a magazine style. Very nice. It'll know that you're interested maybe in entrepreneurship and marketing and technology, and it'll add it as sections in your personalized magazine. So check that out. Let's move on because we're running low on time here, and we've got a lot to cover. How do we stay focused while we're reading? Well, one thing we already talked about was use your hand. That's the simplest way you can start focusing better on your reading. Well, what else can we do? Make sure you're focusing on the task at hand. By that I mean, don't try to multitask. That's usually a bad idea. Don't do what this guy on the screen is doing. That might seem very efficient, but I'm sure his coffee is getting watered down. He's probably not reading really fast, and he's taking a horrible shower. He may have woken up with that suit on. If you try to do too many things, for example, when you're reading, don't also be in your email. If you're dedicating some time to read, get your reading done, focus on that task at hand. Don't try to multitask. There's a lot of research that shows, and a lot of you are probably already familiar with this, if you've been an entrepreneur for a while, when you try to do too many things, you don't get much done. Sometimes you've got a whole list of things you've got to do in an entire day. And at the end of the day, you think to yourself, man, I was busy today, but I feel like I got nothing done. And a lot of times this has to do with a lack of focus. And the same thing can happen when you're reading. Do not multitask when you're reading. Try to make sure that, because as an entrepreneur, I would say in general, you are a creator. You are maybe I mean, you're creating potentially jobs, you're creating information, you're creating products and services. And when you're reading, you're consuming. You never want to mix your information consumption with your creating. So keep the creating part and the producing part separate, and you'll be a lot more efficient when you read, and you'll be a lot more efficient when you're getting things done. Let's move on here. This is another way to improve your focus. I recommend using this app called the Stay Focused app. It's actually spelled without the E, so I actually misspelled that, believe it or not. It's actually purposely misspelled. Let me show you. This is an application that I use on the Google Chrome browser. Now, it might also be available for Firefox, and there might even be other ways to access this. But here's how, and by the way, if you're not using Google Chrome, I highly recommend you get the Google Chrome browser. It's very, very fast. Firefox is also a very good one. If you're still using Netscape, it's time to upgrade. Well, I doubt that. But if you're using Google Chrome, there is a Google Chrome web store. And the Google Chrome web store, you can just Google it, and you'll find it here. You click on Stay Focused. Or you could even spell it correctly, and it will show up right over here. And I like this app because it has the eye, and that reminds me of the iris logo. I'm going to add this to Chrome. Let me show you how this works. I add it to Chrome. You see it shows up at the top here. Here's how I use this application. As entrepreneurs, we are in charge of our time, and it's very easy when you're on the internet. If you're getting a lot of your work done in front of a computer screen, it's very easy to get distracted on the computer. So for example, you might have websites that distract you. For example, like maybe you get on Facebook, and Facebook is an easy way to get distracted and accidentally spend an hour of your day just hanging out on Facebook. Well, maybe you go to other sites. Sometimes people send you YouTube videos that are hilarious and they want you to check them out. It's very easy to spend a lot of time on sites like YouTube. So here's what we need to do. We need to set up some parental controls for ourselves and block certain sites. Now let me show you how this application works to block sites, because there's a lot of applications that do this. And by the way, I see we're getting close to, we've got about a minute before the webinar is supposed to end. We're probably going to go for another, let's see here. We're probably going to go for another 5-10 minutes. So if you need to go, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email with the archive in a little bit. But let me show you the Stay Focused app because it's really interesting. So what you do when you go click on the options over here, you get to a screen like this. And then you can set how much time you want per day. Set the maximum number of minutes per day that you will be allowed to browse sites on the blocked sites list. So the blocked sites list is over here. Now right now there's nothing in here. But if I go to right here, it'll say, okay, you're giving yourself 10 minutes. This is the default. You might say, well, I want 15 minutes to be able to check Facebook and YouTube. This is a total amount of minutes. How much time do you want for all of these sites? So let's start blocking some sites. I'll click here and I'll put Facebook and I'll put YouTube. You put any other sites you want to block, or not exactly block, but it'll block after the 10 minutes. Okay, you start blocking them. Let's watch what happens. When I go to Facebook, watch the color of this blue eyeball up here turn from blue to red. I click on Facebook, and uh-oh, here's what that means. Click on that, and it is counting down from my 10 minutes, my allotted time for being on this website. This is a great way to focus because you're just saying, all right, I know I want to, maybe you do want to check Facebook a certain amount per day. Maybe you do some of your marketing on Facebook for your business. Well, you can simply set how much maximum time do you want to spend on these kind of sites. Well, you can see it's counting down, and this is a good way to kind of make sure. And the same thing will happen when I go on the other site I blocked, like YouTube. It turns red, and it's still counting down, you'll see. Now, what happens when the time runs out? I'm not going to wait a whole 9 minutes. Here's what I'm going to, well, actually, let me show you this. What if you try to get more time? Because here's what happens when people use applications like this. All of a sudden, they realize, you know what, I need more than 10 minutes for Facebook. I need to spend another 15 minutes on there. So they'll put like 15 right here, and they'll try to change the time in the middle of all this. When you click set, the application knows what you're trying to do. See what it says there? It says you're trying to give yourself more time. You sure that's a good idea? Maybe you should reconsider. And what if I click OK? It'll say, seriously, dude, the whole point of this extension is to stop you from procrastinating. You're only hurting yourself and the kitten that gets an electric shock every time you click OK. Are you sure you can live with yourself? I click OK. And now it says, meow, I hope you're happy. I click OK, and your settings have been updated. So it kind of gives you the guilt trip, and that is pretty useful sometimes. Well, what if let me change it down to a minute because I want to show you what happens when we run out of time. If I put this down to a minute, it'll tell me, okay, you're giving yourself less time? Slow clap. Well played, my friend. All right, good. So I go back to Facebook, and let's say I'm browsing around on Facebook. And you can see this timer is just counting down. About 20 seconds left here. And when the time runs out, it's going to start blocking that site. And this is extremely useful because you do not need, as an entrepreneur, you don't need to be on Facebook for an hour a day. And you can see already we're running out of time. And once this time runs out, it looks like I'm not going to have any more time for Facebook all day. And it's going to start blocking. I like that message. It says, shouldn't you be working? And if I try to go to YouTube, it'll tell me the same thing. Nice. Now, ultimately, if you really wanted to cheat and you really wanted to get on Facebook for another 5 minutes, you could click here and just remove the application from your browser. Wouldn't recommend that. Use this Stay Focused app to stay focused. It's going to help you tremendously. Now, another thing I want to introduce here to stay focused is reading with deadlines. You want to have deadlines. We know deadlines make us more productive, and deadlines help us focus better. So have a deadline per page. Maybe have a deadline per chapter. I'm not going to spend more. Let's say this chapter is 20 minutes and I could get through maybe a page per minute, let's say. I'm not going to spend more than 20 minutes on the chapter. You set that as a deadline or a goal. Or set a deadline per article or for a whole magazine. Or even for a book, you could say, you know what, I don't want to, even though I'm reading this whole book, I don't want to spend more than 2 hours on this book. I'll give you an example. When I'm reading The Economist, I get it in the office during the day, and I set a deadline and I say, I've got 15 minutes. I'm getting through the entire magazine. Now, obviously, I'm not going to read the entire magazine with, word for word in 15 minutes. That would be like 10,000 plus words per minute, and I can't read that fast. I can read fast, but not that fast. Well, I'm selectively getting through The Economist in 15 minutes. Here's how I do it. Remember how we talked about this preview, overview, and read? Or those 3 steps. Preview, overview, and read. What I do is I do the first 2 steps, preview and overview, on every article in the magazine. Actually, not every article. Some of the articles, I read the headline, and maybe I'm not interested in the political situation in a country that I can barely locate on a map. Okay? The preview and the overview is maybe all I need. Sometimes I'm looking at the headline and it doesn't interest me, and I won't even do preview and overview. But for any articles that interest me even slightly, I will read first and last paragraph, then I'll read all my first sentences or the headings, and then I'll decide, do I want to read this, yes or no? And if the answer is yes, I circle the title of the article, but I tell myself I'm going to read this later because I gave myself a deadline to 15 minutes to get through the entire Economist. And I'm basically previewing and overviewing as many articles as I can in that 15 minutes, and actually not as many articles as I can. I have to get through the whole magazine, so I make it a point to make sure that no matter what, this has to be done. It's a deadline. And then what do you think happens later on when I have more time? I'm going to go through all that material, and I'm going to look at the articles that I circled, and I'm going to read those fully. I'm going to read them fast because I know what they're about already. So keep that in mind. That's a good way. Set deadlines when you've got reading that you need to do. Here's why I recommend entrepreneurs set deadlines, because you don't have a boss. You're your own boss, and when you don't, when you have a boss, the boss will be like, hey, I need this by Monday, or I need this in 1 hour to be done. And when you're your own boss, sometimes we forget that we still need deadlines. We need to impose deadlines on ourselves to make ourselves more productive. Now, with reading in your inbox or reading your email, we don't have time to go through a whole email management webinar, but we did do a webinar on this. You could check that out in the archives. The webinar that we did, it was talking about email management, how to read and respond to your email faster. So if you spend a lot of time in your inbox, first of all, that's the one big tip. Don't live in your inbox. As an entrepreneur, you don't have time to be simply living in your inbox. Don't become an email zombie, okay? Just because you got back to somebody within a minute doesn't mean you're being efficient with your day. I'm sending you a link in the chat box there that shows where you can get that archive if you're interested in it. Click over and you can check that out. Anyway, let's move on to our next slide. We've got a few more things to cover here. Mind map your ideas as you read. What I use MindMeister to create web-based mind maps. I also want you to know that all of these applications and websites I've been talking to you about today, Iris does not get any financial incentive, and I don't get any financial incentive for talking to you about them. These are real websites that I use on a day-to-day basis, so that's why I'm recommending them to you. MindMeister is a great way to build web-based mind maps, and if you don't know about mind mapping, Mind mapping is a great way to brainstorm. It's a great way to take notes. I found it as a great way to kind of create project plans and sometimes marketing plans. It gives you a big picture view of what you need to do. Now, let me show you real quick, MindMeister. If you go there, you can see I'm already logged in. If you wanted to create a new mind map, you can see I've got some mind maps over here. This email management webinar. I actually mind map all these webinars before I actually deliver them and give these presentations. I always mind map it first before I create any kind of PowerPoint slides, because it's a good way for me to say, all right, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about this, and then I can put that stuff in order later on. It's a great way to organize a presentation. You can do brainstorming with this. Let me show you how easy it is to create a mind map with MindMeister. You click up here, and it already gives you some templates. You could start with a blank template. You could do a brainstorming template. You could do a project plan. There's also SWOT analysis, a meeting, a to-do list. Let's start with a blank one. And we can simply do this right here. We can get in here and go, okay, marketing plan. And we can, say email marketing right over here. We could add something else here, and we could say, okay, we need some word of mouth marketing. And then maybe there's also advertising that we need to do. And that might include, Google AdWords. And, of course I spelled that wrong. Let's not forget about, you've got an internet-based business. You need some SEO, some search engine optimization. And you might even have tasks with this. You see there's an area over here for tasks. You can add notes to any of these things. You can also add a link. If you want to link these ideas to, you can add files. If you want to upload a PDF. And you can make very, very elaborate mind maps. And here's the cool thing. You could even share them. We do this within Iris. When we're brainstorming, we will share a mind map with multiple people. Say, hey, let's all collaborate right here and jot our ideas down. So you can share this, you can publish it. This is a great mind mapping application. So I'd highly, highly recommend it. And if you're reading, mind mapping is a great way to jot down your ideas. Maybe you want to jot down every idea that you get from a business book and what you need to do to kind of get those ideas done. And this is what leads us to our next slide, actionable reading. Don't just read for the sake of reading. You want to learn to read with and get things done. Here's what I mean by that. I just thought about this idea. It was the beginning of the year, rewind back a number of months ago to January. And to me, I was thinking about, all right, what's going to be my New Year's resolution here? I didn't even have one going into midnight. I was just thinking about, the beginning of January, I'm thinking, this year has got to be the year that I really, really kind of grow the business. And it's already grown a lot, and I'm proud of that, but I want to really, really build it up. I was thinking about, I was organizing my bookcase. And I was organizing my bookcase, not exactly organizing it, just painted a room and I was putting up a new bookcase and I was putting my books in there and I was thinking about, man, I've got all these books that I've read. I've got all this information. Now I haven't read every single one of them. Some of those books I decided not to read because I thought they were going to be interesting, and after a few chapters I was like, no, this is not worth my time. But I was looking at all that information. I was thinking, all of that information is, I guess, it's in my head, right? And I've used a lot of that information, but I haven't used all of it. I was thinking about, some of those books, I actually had sometimes a page of notes inside of a book, and it would be like to-do items that I said, okay, while I was reading, I was telling myself, okay, after you finish reading this chapter or later on, you should at some point you should do this. Well, guess what? A lot of those things never got done. And what I found was I was getting a lot of reading done and very little action. And this is what started to frustrate me. I was looking at every single one of those books and I was thinking, man, there were books on sales, there were books on marketing, there were books on public relations, internet marketing, all of these things. And I was thinking, man, how much did I really get the most out of this book? So I started thinking about how can I get more out of a book? And I started thinking about this strategy, what I call actionable reading, where now when I'm reading something that applies to my business, and I'm reading something to generate ideas or to get things done, the moment that I come across something that gives me an idea, let's say it gives me an idea that I need to do something, maybe it's create a website or create a podcast or do some kind of action item, what I do is I stop reading immediately, throw the bookmark in the book, and I know exactly what I need to get done. Now, if this is a quick and simple task, I get it done right away. Now, sometimes this might be a whole project. Let's say you get an idea that you want to create like a podcast or a website or a certain kind of website. Well, those are, those kind of action, those are not even action items, those are projects. And what I'll do, if that gives me an idea that's a project-based thing, instead of just trying to complete that project right afterwards, because that can take multiple steps, I do the first thing to get that project rolling. Maybe I got to delegate that to my assistant. Maybe I've got to, buy a certain domain. I get the first thing done, and then I get back. I put that in my project list, and I get back to doing what I was doing earlier. I start reading again. And the moment I come across another idea, I stop reading and I start doing and getting that thing done. This is actionable reading. This is what every single entrepreneur should be doing. What's happening with a lot of entrepreneurs is they're reading through chapters, articles, things like that. They're getting all these ideas, and they start saying, you know what, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that. And then they never do it, or they forget to do it. And what should be happening, instead of saying, I'll do this tomorrow, I heard this great quote, the road to tomorrow leads to nowhere. And actually, I think I heard that it was a Tony Robbins quote, if you know about Tony Robbins. Amazing speaker, amazing entrepreneur. This is, you don't want to save things for tomorrow. The moment you read something and you get an idea, it's time to act on that, or at least do the first thing that kind of gets the ball rolling. So what I recommend all of you that are watching this webinar right now, stop just reading for the sake of reading. Don't just read to get information. Information stored in your head is useless unless you put it in action. That, just because you read a book, I'm not impressed with that. What did you create? What kind of idea did that give you, and how did that help you? How did that help your business? How did that help other people that are buying your products or services? This is why we're reading. We're not reading just for the sake of getting the information. So I want you to think about how can you start utilizing this principle and this strategy of actionable reading in your daily life. Read something. The moment you get an idea, start doing something. Don't just read because you need to get a lot of reading done. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending. I hope you found this webinar helpful. All of you fellow entrepreneurs that are watching this, if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to connect with me by email, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. If you're going to connect with me on Facebook, just when you're sending the request, just go ahead and let me know that you saw one of these webinars, or maybe you met me at one of the classes. I really want to thank you guys for coming out and supporting IRIS. We've been growing a lot over the last few years. We've had some high-profile clients. That's, for a small organization like us, it's been big steps. We've done speed reading classes and memory skills workshops for companies like Groupon, their executive team at Google. We did something for employees of NASA, which was great for me because I was always very interested in astronomy. And we've really been growing, and I want to thank you all for coming, because it's people like you that go to these webinars and kind of spread the word. That's how we've really grown. So thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you soon, either in person or at another one of these webinars. Thank you all, and have a great day.